So it's great, isn't it, when you realise how much is actually going on already? And it was so interesting to hear about all those different projects. So thank you for that and sharing that with us, and also showing the intention of where things are going. We often hear about the word circular economy. I thought it'd be well, I didn't create the program, but Marcus and team, and it is one of those ones where you set the scene perfectly at the beginning, and then we can build from that. So how much better can we get than having our first speaker this morning? Hemant Chaudhary is the founder and managing director of the Circular Economy Alliance Australia. He can set the scene, but his work with the United Nations, with World Bank, with Australian government, and also international agencies is going to I think, put us in the right direction from the very start. And by the way, given the fact that everyone's biog is already in here, I will not go through what is already written, if that's okay. Please make it welcome.
Thank you, James. The Honorable Amberjade Sanderson, MLA, Minister for Environment, Climate Change, Climate Action, Commerce, Michelle Andrews, Director General, Department of Water and Environment Regulation, Reg Howard-Smith, Chair of the West Authority, members of the West Authority, distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to thank Marcus and his wonderful team, Wendy and Sarah, for hosting such a fantastic event. And I think it's very timely, and I couldn't wait to be here, actually. And I've been working with Marcus for quite a while now, and I think we met 3 years ago in a UN event, and since then we're thinking and plotting and planning something like this to happen in WA, and I'm just so pleased to be here. I deliberately chose the topic, and I called it a global movement, because it is truly a global movement, and I think I will share some insights with you why that is the case. In 2020, first time in the history of humanity, we have crossed 100 billion tons of material extracted. Linear economy has given us phenomenal opportunities, created, the lifestyle that we enjoy. But I think we are reaching the limits of where we sit. And I'll sort of, whilst we cross 100 billion tons annually, this report here actually is pretty damning that if you measure circularity, which is basically material coming back into value chain, we have gone down from 9.1% to 8.6%. So basically what it tells us is that 93% almost of what we extract currently is lost. So that's the first issue that confronts us. And when you look at, put a perspective on the trends here, in 1970, it was 26.7 billion tons per annum. We crossed 100 in 2020. By 2050, we could be reaching between 184 to 200 billion tons. And if you see that particular red line, that is where we should be sitting if we really want to ensure that we have a regenerative kind of a economy, and Earth carrying capacity actually can sustain this. So based on this, with the current projection, we could be reaching almost 4.5 times Earth's carrying capacity, and currently we sit around 1.75 times. And if you look at the trends as well, I mean, if you look at the damning statistics, there is, our per capita material demand, which has gone up from 7.4 tons to 12.2 tons per capita by 2017. So that says something about our consumption patterns. If you're born in 2010, this kind of, based on the current ability to extract resources. I think by 2050, we are looking at oil getting extinct. Coal has a fair bit of life there. But you look at some other stuff there, what is damming are even things like lead and silver, which are actually reaching the limits of extraction and processing by 2030, 2040. Now, these are very essential parts of our current, economic model, because, things that we use, the quality of life that we have built uses this stuff. And also that is reflected in the way our waste generation is going as well. And we expect by 2050 to reach around 3.4 billion tons of waste being disposed. And by the way, 80 to 85% of this waste is still getting into oceans and landfills, or uncontrolled landfills. It's not exactly a very great scenario. Pollution and environmental degradation, we know the impacts of what we're facing, so I'll not elaborate on that particular point. Climate change. Just day before yesterday, I think there was a report about how I think Florida is considering a proposal for a wall, 20-feet wall, and it's cost of $6 billion to deal with the issue of water stagnation and the rising sea levels and what else. There are parts in Florida, I understand, for the last 3 months, the streets have not been drained of water. So this is US, and so I think Mr. Trump perhaps should have considered the Florida wall than the Mexican wall. And obviously the economic loss and poverty, which is, and that's not going to be limited to just the so-called growth economies or developing nations. Even there are reports now, which are quite credible reports, even economies of something like Australia by 2050 would shrink by 12.5% GDP. And I think a couple of Europe, $5 trillion a year is going to be the impact of climate change. So it's significant. So coming back to what's circular economy, and I'll perhaps simplify it in a minute, but basically the aim is to keep your resources in circularity, restorative, so that we leave things for the next generation, and you retain the maximum value of your products, components, materials, and services. What is more important to realize that it is a phenomenal opportunity as well, because you can look at waste in two ways. I look at waste as a resource at a wrong place. If you look at, good example is plastic. Plastic has given us some great, benefits to our quality of life. But when the plastic ends up at a wrong place, it becomes an issue. And we're talking about by 2050, the ocean would have more plastic than fish. But just look at what's happening currently. On an average, $120 billion worth of plastic goes into oceans right now in the world. So it's technically a resource if it is properly captured and reprocessed. And that could be applied to other stuff like electronic waste. $60 billion worth of electronic waste currently goes into landfill. And these are some pretty, well-documented statistics. And that applies to other stuff as well, like food waste so it is a phenomenal opportunity, even if you look at from a waste perspective as well. But if you start to look at redesigning your entire economic system with the entire value chain, it provides great opportunities. So what is circular economy in another ways? Basically, we reduce consumption of resources, we use renewable resources where we maximize the use of renewable resources, minimize hazardous resources, keep resources in use as long as we can, extract the maximum value while they are in use, and minimize the impact throughout the resource life cycle. And finally, we still recover and regenerate value out of the resource. What's happening globally? This is, there are reports, in EU, they talk about creating 3 million jobs. a $2 trillion USD per annum benefit because of circular economy transition. India, there's a report about 30% increase in GDP and creating again millions of jobs. United Nations, $2 trillion per annum could be the benefit. We did a study in South Australia in 2018, and based on that modeling, in the next 10 years, we could add 25,000 jobs in South Australia in circular economy. And they are not necessarily in the recycling and resource recovery space. They are actually up in the value chain. So better products, better services, all those kind of things. So it's not about just recycling and resource recovery. In terms of policy development, even in countries, Asian countries or Asia Pacific region, a lot of work has happened. Japan started it in 2000, China in 2008. These are national policies being developed in these countries. Taiwan is doing phenomenal job in circular economy. So it's not something new. It's not something that we are talking as something, this is happening as a global movement. Europe, Germany took a lead in 2012, but if you look at most of the European nations, they're all having national policies and programs pretty formalized and structured in circular economy. But what is challenging is that despite all this, if you look at what happening in Europe, having taken such a strong policy and program initiative in circular economy, the waste export from Europe actually went up by 75% in the last 14 years. So what it also tells you is that while the concept is easy to understand, putting it in practice requires a fair bit of collaboration and coordination. It is not I'm going to skip through this particular slide because this talks about the whole evolution of where we sit today as in circular economy, where it started in the 70s with pollution prevention and waste minimization, to in the 90s to cleaner production and green economy, resource efficiency, eco-efficiency, blue economy, and we are now talking about circular economy, which kind of covers all those aspects. So how can we transition to circular economy? And I'm just trying to keep it in very simple terms. I think the first and foremost point I would like to make is we need to demystify it. We need to make it real and relevant. Because if you look at what's happening with recycling, recycling is easy to understand. 35 years ago or 40 years ago, we coined the term recycling. Anybody can get it. And despite that, it is still 80% of the world is still not recycling properly. So there has to be a reason why it is. So we need to make it real and relevant. That's the first point. The second point I would like to make is focus on polluter and producer pays. So I think Marcus is going to talk about EPR and other stuff. So that is sacrosanct because you need to have a financial model to create a financial model. As we talk about business models in circular economy, you need to, when I started my work with South Australian government in '93, we introduced a $5 a ton levy on landfill, waste going to landfill. It was not received very well, and we said, look, we'll do it because we use that money towards, half of that could be used for better enforcement, half of it could be used for better incentives. So both carrot and stick kind of approach. Now it everywhere, not just in South Australia, it sits at $145 a ton. And it provides phenomenal incentive for technology to come in, for people to focus on waste minimization and all those kind of interventions. We did a program in South Australia where I had 48 industries participate from 18 sectors, and the focus was on prevention. So it was a cleaner production program. We did that in partnership with United Nations Environment Program. After 3 years of running the program, we had Center for Economic Evaluation from Adelaide University to an independent valuation of the program. This was amazing. We spent $2 million on that program. The return on investment for participating industries, and these are 48 industries from 18 sectors, was 32.3 times. So, so I guess that's $68 million return on $2 million investment. We need to make it easy, and that's critical because people are time poor. understand the choices you make and the choices you give. I'll talk about it in the next slide. No collaboration, no circular economy. It's absolutely needed. Governments can't do it alone. Industry cannot do it alone. And community cannot do it alone. So we got to have that. We need to look at the entire value chain. And I think, and the last one is systems thinking. Because it requires everything. It's like a pieces of a jigsaw. I call it a circle of circular economy. That you need to have policy, education, right commercial instrument, business model, technology, all need to kind of work together. It cannot be just one size fits all. It cannot be a silver bullet solution. So it has to be thought through. When I talk about choices we make and choices Bitcoin is a good case in point here. We would be looking at in another maybe years, the amount of energy consumed by Bitcoin mining would exceed Australia's energy consumption. And these are some of the damning statistics that we can have a look at. Australia sits at 192, terawatt hours, and look at Bitcoin where it sits at nearly 131. And this is a monster we have created. And for what? For gamblers and what else and what not. I mean, I'll hold my language here. So anyway, so I don't want to be carried away. Need to be very, but it serves no one. Bitcoin. Can anybody tell me what is Bitcoin serving? Who is it serving really at the moment? Another interesting, just somebody sent it to me from US. This is a classic. The spears grown in Argentina and packed in Thailand and then sold in US. I mean, look at the amount of distance covered by that fruit. So, it just, these are the kind of things that circular economy does need to consider. So when you talk about the whole thing, I come from South Australia. I've been there for almost 30 years, but there's been a journey in South Australia. And if you look at overall sort of statistics, we currently divert 84% of waste from landfill. We should be reaching 90, perhaps in a couple of years, if with all the other sort of policy measures we are taking. Water is another precious resource, being the driest state in the driest continent. It's always been very progressive in the stormwater and wastewater recycling area. 60% of the energy currently is renewable, and we expect to get 100% by 2030. And it's created jobs, opportunities. So, and it's happened with a combination of, policies, technology, will, commitment, vision, drive, you name it. So in 2016, we held a UN event. Marcus came along for that event, and we had a Adelaide Declaration on Circular Economy, and that was basically committing the government of South Australia, kind of committing itself to raise awareness, build capacity in circular economy in the Asia-Pacific region. And perhaps that's been one of the reasons why the Circular Economy Alliance Australia, we kind of been working very closely with the government on that space. But I'm very pleased to share something which is very exciting, very close to my heart. I've been working with the government and a lot of international players establishing a global center of excellence in circular economy. It's a not-for-profit entity. South Australian government, it is not a South Australian government entity. It is basically, they are a foundation partner. So they kind of, help us get established. So, and our objectives are, as a not-for-profit, is to promote the understanding of circular economy, harness and leverage collective intellectual and financial capital, create a robust collaborative platform because that is needed, and basically create a global coalition of leaders and change agents who can drive and work together and drive circular economy. A lot of focus on partnerships with government agencies, UN agencies, corporates, and universities. I'm going to share a video. It's a 4-minute video, which I'm allowed to share about because I think we got the go-ahead last week from the government. So I'll just kind of play that. There we go.
Welcome to the Global Centre of Excellence in Circular Economy. Headquartered in Adelaide, we're a registered not-for-profit, backed by an international board, a foundation partner of Green Industry South Australia, and have the support of the United Nations Centre for Regional Development.
The model that we have developed over the last 250 years, it's basically a take, make, use, and dispose model. It's a linear model, which relies on mass consumption and which also perhaps relies on maximizing an artificial demand.
Also known as Circular 360, we are the place for you to join a coalition of leaders and learn about, design and implement transformation projects that will make better use of your resources throughout their life cycle.
Based on what I read, it is scary that by 2050, we are looking at close to 200 billion tons of resources being extracted, which is 4.5 times Earth's carrying capacity or the Earth's capacity to regenerate itself.
We believe the keys to evolving to a circular economy are designing out waste, mitigating climate change, and achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The Centre specialises in co-designing projects and partnering with organisations and individuals from diverse sectors to achieve scalability, visibility and impact. Our work is underpinned by a core philosophy that in order to deliver holistic, preventative and long-term solutions, we need an ecosystem that involves multiple stakeholders covering policy, enforcement, technology, education, economics and innovation. For those organisations and governments who embrace this transition, there is a profound economic benefit to be had in the creation of jobs, new industries and generating wealth from waste.
This concept of net zero fascinates me, and yes, it is good. But even if the world decides to go 100% renewable, so all our energy demand is met by renewable, we would only account for maybe 48% of our greenhouse emissions. You have to look at how we extract, manage, use, and reuse our resources. So circular economy has to play a very critical role in terms of meeting our obligations. There is the assumption that if you go all renewable and we'll be fine, it's not going to happen that way.
For things to change, both a top-down and bottom-up approach is needed. And this is your invitation to join us and collaborate on a better future. Bring us your problems, ideas and energy, and together we will move beyond conferences, classrooms and boardrooms and redesign your linear processes.
Circular economy is something, in my view, is almost a social re-engineering project. The human element is extremely strong. We need to work very hard in keeping the message simple. We need to demystify circular economy. From their perspective, they need to understand how they can be empowered to make those changes in the way they go about using and consuming and discarding resources. Waste is a resource at a wrong place. If we can't reuse, recycle, repurpose, remanufacture, then you must reconsider or reject. Look at an approach which designs out waste and wastage, then you are going towards circular economy.
There is much work to be done and all of us have a role to play. Welcome to the Global Centre of Excellence in Circular Economy. Thank you for...
I'll move forward. But talking about, thank you, some of the initiatives that Marcus and I wanted to discuss with you, just on impact initiatives that we could consider for WA. And I just wanted to throw some ideas at the crowd here, is how we could, a roadmap for WA would be good. A circular Perth initiative just to get community engaged. You could look at developing circular economy framework for industry-specific sectors like mining, which is so strong in WA, obviously. Community education empowerment, circular procurement, technology incubators are a great way to, again, get it into the public domain, and technology is very important element of it. Mentorship awards, to just encourage that thinking. And just on the current level of engagement, I'll finish here, that even before the center is yet to be established, but I have been discussing and strategizing this project, this initiative with a number of international agencies, national agencies, and the response is fantastic. They really want to be part of this in some shape and form, either in a strategic way or in a financial way, or providing their intellectual input. So I do sincerely hope that we form wonderful collaboration with WA and the Center of Excellence and really drive the whole agenda of circular economy. So thank you so much for your time.
Don't run away. Stay there. I'm just going to grab this. That was a perfect scene set, and also an opportunity for us to get excited by what could be. We're a long way away from it. I mean, those figures are quite alarming. Thank you for being here, Minister. We really appreciate it. It's alarming when you see figures like that. I want to ask about the importance of communication. Obviously, I'm slightly biased. It is my space. But if the public knew what you just described, in fact, if more people were aware of this, perhaps we would change. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
You were talking about bottom up and top down.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about awareness within the people, because it's our planet.
Yes.
It's all of us that are going to be faced with this problem. So how do we get everyone aware of what you just described? I mean, you can't go and talk to everyone. Well, maybe you can. But how do we make this happen more rapidly?
I think the governments have a role here, because they have a role to not just be enablers, but also be they need to drive this agenda. And look, good example is Bitcoin in this case. How many people are really aware? I mean, yes, you can go on internet and find out, but even about resources and stuff like that, we are not really going out there and talking about this, and we do need to, because if an average person out there understands this, he or she they will make the right changes. They will actually push the government. They'll also bring those changes in their own lifestyle to actually drive that. So we have to be on the front foot on this, and we cannot be sitting back and just accept business as usual.
So you think governments have to do this? Organizations have to do this?
I think so, because it has to start from the governments. And it, again, might sound a very radical statement, but you can't really rely on corporates to do this. I mean, how many voluntary EPR schemes have worked? I mean, when you have the corporates making billions and trillions now, and yes, I'm not here to back them, but at the end of the day, there have to be people at a senior level who are thinking about this and saying to the community, the corporates, that this is not done. We have to make some reparative changes here.
As you've all just heard what you've just heard, and you all have your own relevant areas in which you focus, how do you think, and I'm interested in, by the way, this is all totally confidential, but it's important for the workshop to have different ideas. As you will go away from today and you hear about these stats, you see these stats in front of you, know how worrying it is, how do each of you go and say, we have to do something and communicate this? Who's got some ideas? Because it's really important that it's not just government, it's not just down at the floor. Where does it come from?
Look, I think it helps to think of things in terms of regions. They're understandable, they're comprehensible, and they're sort of already set up for us. But I am interested in your thoughts on whether South Australia has looked at it from a regional perspective. I'm looking at the Perth Hills, for example, and another group is looking at it from the southwest point of view. And there are advantages there because they're small, they're comprehensible, the opportunities, the investments are not large that are required, the policy shifts are already happening. So I'm just curious on your thoughts about how a regional approach can help.
Yeah, I think South Australia was a good case in point. I think they reached being at the lowest point in the Murray-Darling River system, the driest state in the driest continent. I think that kind of brought in a thinking amongst people, the community, that they need to do more with less. It was part of the psyche, and it helped. Whenever you introduce any measure that pushed the boundaries, the community would not resist; they would accept it, and that is even when you banned plastic bags in 2009, we banned single-use plastic just 6 months ago. The community has been right behind it, because I think this is part of the psyche. Now, I guess the problem is this, that how many people see that the pain point has reached? We have reached the pain point, and that's the key in my view. It's the pain point. I always use this analogy that it's like, imagine being on the top deck of Titanic, going full steam ahead, trying to hit this, going and hitting this iceberg. There are few people on the deck, and in their feeble voices, they are saying iceberg, shouting iceberg ahead, and the rest of the whole crew and everybody is sleeping. And the thing is, perhaps we all need to get on the top deck and shout.
It's the same with climate change, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, until we see sort of the water coming down the streets, we're not going to change.
Yeah.
But I like that idea of regions or little areas. And what about the idea of competition? You know, like the league table. You know, you're performing really well. You lot are needing to pick your game up.
Yeah, I think, and that's where I think Marcus is going to talk about it, because I think establishing some standard matrix is going to be the key in terms of evaluating how a region is performing against other region.
Does that exist? Is there a matrix? Is there a measurement?
There's a lot of work being done there on that space. It needs to be standardized, though. That's the challenge.
Standardized across the world.
And even if you started doing it across Australia, that will be a big achievement.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was awesome. That was inspirational. So the circular economy, I have the privilege of working in local government. So let's face it, local government is at the core of waste management and the difference we can make and working together. My personal belief is until we change the pricing model of dealing with waste and educating the community, then we're going to continue to have challenges. We always keep talking about, you know, let's charge, and the challenge in local governments, we have council and everything, let's charge $40 or $50 a tonne for waste. It's not, it's $150 a tonne.
Yeah.
Let's start talking real numbers.
That's right.
And in my opinion, I was interested to hear what you were talking about, and I think you used a number of $140 or $150 in South Australia.
Yep.
Until we start talking that sort of number, then we won't deal with waste challenges in WA.
What happens when you mention that number at the moment here?
You can't do it because council, the community will not pay in terms of things. So if we educate and work with our community, and it's a privilege to have Marcus putting this on and to actually be here, and we need to educate our communities, we need to talk to our communities, we need our local governments, we need our ministers, government to talk about that.
If your public saw this presentation, they would say, well, we're happy to pay that, or we'll share that cost.
Absolutely. If we talk about what the benefits are in terms of doing that and educating our community, we can shift that. So we have to shift the point. We have to shift our pricing point.
How likely is that?
It comes down to leadership, isn't it? Finally, and I think Marcus needs every bit of support, I believe, in doing this in WA, and hopefully everybody can rally. And
because I can imagine from a media's perspective, if suddenly everyone's being told you're going to have to pay extra for this, there will be uproar from the media, because it's easy to get on board and sort of say this is ridiculous, what a stupid idea, because they haven't heard this side of the story, this important side. Once people are aware of this, they'll go, yes, we will be happy to pay.
I think that the total picture has to be put in front of, and in all honesty and transparency, people need to really see what really. We don't need to dilute or sugarcoat the reality and the message.
Also, we need to have the resource seen as valuable.
Yeah.
Is there any country that you think is really sort of setting highest standard?
Or look, some I guess regions, but not countries as such. But Europe tends to be doing a good job because the community understands this. Everybody is aware, so the level of understanding and awareness is pretty high in Europe. But this, I mean, if you look at their waste exports, they are still dealing with those challenges. So it's not that easy to achieve that transition. But the point is that I think if money or capitalism has so-called led to where we are today, if we make that theory, then it could also be the solution for this. And that's where I think we need to move.
So that's the mindset shift. Yeah. And how quickly, I mean, if you were being super optimistic, how quickly can we shift some of this? And, hopefully there'll be other meetings like this taking place around the world. How quickly could we shift some of what you described?
I think the transition can happen pretty quickly. It's not as if we need to really look at 10 years, 20 years. It depends on how sincerely we enforce those measures. But it would happen. People get used to it. They resist, but they get used to it. They accept it as a norm of life, and they change their behaviors accordingly. I mean, none of us like to pay parking fines and speeding fines. I certainly don't. I get on the wrong side of that number of times, but I just have to pay it. I accept it as a reality of life.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. One of the key parts of the circular economy that I really wanted to reiterate and follow on from Hemant yet again, and you'll hear me speak on day 3, and I'll say it probably about 17 times on Friday as well, is that what is fundamental and key to any transition in the circular economy is collaboration. It is absolutely fundamental. If we do not collaborate to solve these big sticky problems across boundaries, across sectors, across government, across the community, we will not get circular economy outcomes. Hemant raised it. You know, I will keep ramming this home for the rest of the 3 days, because fundamentally we've got such an important group of people in this room at the moment. Some of us already work together, but we really are going to have to, light the fire under state government, bring them to the table. They need to understand the role they play and where the government, the current regulation, and policy they have in place is stopping us from that transition. We also need to do the same at local government and regional level. But everyone plays a role here. Like, this is a paradigm shift. So we're actually changing the way we're thinking about how we develop and grow. And that doesn't happen overnight. It only happens in collaboration. So everyone in this room, you will see their face again, and you will work with them on sticky problems for the next 10 or 20 years. That's the way forward.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just a couple more before we move on. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a quick point about the cost of waste that the gentleman was talking about over here, and the role of governments. My thought on the life cycle cost of products is that we probably need to look at moving that to the front end. So people, if you start charging people for better waste management, people start dumping and we all start acting a bit dishonestly. You need to be charging for more like a user pays, charge for the waste in a user pays, add it to the capital cost of anything, rather than pushing that down the line of product use.
Super, thank you. And one more comment. Who was it who had the hand up? Was it someone did? Oh, it was just straight past you. Sorry.
We've spoken a lot about front end and top up, bottom down, all of that. Regarding the top end of it, how are we going to make that shift in Australia, since we've got significant, difficulties from like an electronics, tyre reuse, a few of the other things that we're exporting from overseas or importing from overseas, and we don't have the control of the actual materials that we're using. So from a circular perspective, you mentioned earlier about keeping things in the train as long as possible, or in the supply chain as long as possible. But if we don't have control on how to keep it in the supply chain because the materials have now been manipulated in a way that they can't be recycled, how are we going to influence that going forward?
I think it can be done with better standards putting in place, and we still have to do a lot of work on that. But I agree with your point that, I think there's a presentation by APCO this afternoon about packaging and how they're working on that front. But just like packaging, it also comes down to material inflows and what really comes into the economy, and where does the responsibility of the producer and stops. Marcus was, over dinner mentioned that in Europe, when you purchase a new car, in some countries, you pay 300 euros upfront cost for the end of the life recovery or recycling. So, and 92% of the car parts are recycled in Europe, in this country. So it's all about setting those standards, those parameters, which actually finally, again, drive the objective of keeping the resource in circularity.
Just before you stand off the stage, and I know you're going to be here for the duration, but on Friday, where would you like to see this WA cohort have moved to so that you can be energized and excited by what we're going to do?
It would be phenomenal that by Friday we have a consensus amongst the distinguished guests here, that let's work towards developing a roadmap for Western Australia on circular economy. Let's plan. Let's do something which actually is a visionary document, which kind of starts to spell out where we want to be, and would be fantastic to actually get to the point where people agree to work together and develop this.
Absolutely. It is a masterclass. It's not just a conference for sitting here filling days. It's to actually do something constructive. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.